Well, howdy there, folks. James, Political Friar, coming to you again. Got the Baylor hat on, and so we're going to talk about a legal topic today. And that topic is presidential immunity, where it came from, how it works, how it's important, and how it applies to Donald Trump's case that is before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Oral argument happened today. That's what's inspiring this talk. But we're going to go through a little bit more history and depth around presidential immunity and what it does and how it applies because, Donald Trump didn't make up this argument about himself being immune from prosecution out of whole cloth. There's history and law and precedent that suggests that this argument, although I expect it to be rejected, is not been tested yet, and Donald Trump is making it. And so this is actually a example of the system working, but we'll just go through what presidential immunity is and how it works. So the first thing that you got to think about in understanding presidential immunity, or really in immunity, is the concept of an affirmative defense. So an affirmative defense is something where you argue yes and. You argue, yes, I committed the crime. I killed that guy. And that guy was coming at me with a knife. So, of course, I shot him. I have an affirmative defense of self defense, personal self defense. There are many affirmative defenses woven through our laws. So, the presumption is that you commit a crime, then you're going to be punished. You're going to be thrown in jail or you're going to be fined. But the reality is there are circumstances where criminal activity is forgivable. And that's what an affirmative defense is. So, you've got President Trump being accused of committing a crime, but he is arguing that he shouldn't suffer any consequences, even if he did commit the crime, because he was president at the time. That's the argument. Where did he come up with this idea? Well, presidential immunity's got deep roots. And for good reason, the presidential immunity doctrine exists. It's something that I think is a good thing. It really got going in 1867. Yep, history first. 1867, when Andrew Johnson blatantly violated federal law by appointing a cabinet member that the radical Republicans disagreed with. Now, the Republicans couldn't get him to not appoint that cabinet member through legislative means other than passing a law saying don't do it. And when Johnson did it, they sued him. They took him to the Supreme Court eventually, and the Supreme Court said, appointing a cabinet member is a purely executive function. That's not something that the court was willing to second guess, and it's also not something that the Congress is going to second guess outside of the Senate confirmation structure. So the court says, no, the president is immune from following this federal statute, and there is no remedy. Presidential immunity begins. So, yeah, the president can break the law under certain circumstances. And we've learned a couple other circumstances over the decades that have passed. So we know one, president can break the law when it's a purely executive function. Well, entirely within the executive branch, the Congress isn't allowed to constrain that management. Think of it as hiring and firing. We also know that the president can't be sued for actions that he commits in civil court so long as those actions are within the outer perimeter of the president's job. So this came about again with misbehaving. I guess you only get law when people misbehave. So it's no surprise that the next president after Johnson to come out of my mouth around presidential immunity is Nixon. In Nixon v. Fitzgerald, the Supreme Court held that as long as the president's actions, conduct, was within the outer perimeter, that's the term of art, outer perimeter of the president's job, then no civil suit can arise from it. And so let's give an example of this that is from real life example. Anwar al-Awlaki was an American. He was born in Las Cruces, New Mexico. He attended college in America. He got his bachelor's degree in Colorado. He started a master's program in California and a PhD program in Washington, D.C. Didn't finish either of those, but he was an American, born and raised. And he was a terrorist. He over time became radicalized through his experience visiting both Yemen and Afghanistan in contact with radical Islamic terrorists of the variety that you expect. For example, when he was in San Diego, he led a prayer group that two of the 9/11 hijackers actually attended. When he was in DC, he led another prayer group that a different 9/11 hijacker attended. That was the group that he sort of swam in. After 9/11 happened, he was still in the United States, and he published shortly thereafter a article that said why Muslims love death, describing the ethos of suicide bombers and heaping great praise on the Palestinian suicide bombers. Not explicitly the 9/11 bombers, because too soon, but it was clear that that was his ideology, and he started taking action. He moved back to Yemen, and he started organizing money laundering schemes and ways of getting money from his organization using his U.S. citizen privilege to raise money and funnel it to terrorist organizations, including Al Qaeda. The guy was a terrorist. I mean, there's no doubt about it, but he was also an American. So in 2010, he managed to get himself on a list, a CIA approved list. So, one of the things that the Bush administration and the Obama administration and the Trump administration and the Biden administration have done is they've done targeted killings overseas. They've used drones, usually to blow up terrorists. They're putting an American citizen on a list for a drone to go blow him up. Now, he hasn't been tried in federal court and had a jury of his peers hand down a death penalty. Can you do that? Well, apparently you can, because in July 2010, his father actually sued the government to get his name off of the kill list. Now, that suit didn't actually turn on presidential immunity. The judge says, well, the kid's not dead yet, so you don't have standing to sue. That it was true, but a few months later, the kid was dead. Obama had a drone blow him up, and he died. And then a few weeks later, he had a drone blow up his 16-year-old son, who was also pretty darn radical, definitely a terrorist, not a good guy. But you now have an American citizen who is, hellfire garbage at the order of the president. In question, now that he's dead, could Al-Awlaki's father sue now under a wrongful death suit? And the answer is no. No. President Barack Obama murdered, arguably, an American citizen under the auspices of defending the country from terrorism. And that is definitely within the outer limits of his presidential power. So no, he can't be sued for that. He can't be sued even after he's out of office, because as long as you're doing your job as president, like hiring and firing in the executive office or defending the country from terrorism, you can break the law as the president. That's actually a feature. And, this guy probably deserved the missile strike. He was not a good guy. He would have participated in the murder of lots more Americans. So presidential immunity is probably good. This was followed up by a memo from the Justice Department that is the only thing that talks about presidential immunity from criminal acts. See, remember all this presidential immunity stuff in Johnson, it was for a civil injunction. Fire the guy that you shouldn't have hired. In Obama's case, it was for civil wrongful death. Now we got to wonder whether presidential immunity extends to crimes, because that allegation hasn't been made. The allegation that faces Donald Trump, so you've heard so many times, is he's the first president to ever be indicted. And so we have to ask the question, well, how does presidential immunity work with criminal actions or alleged criminal actions at this point? And Donald Trump says it is absolute and limitless. He actually argues that his presidential immunity to do with crimes is greater than his presidential immunity to do with civil. And I guess, when you're negotiating, I guess you anchor high or do something. It's an absurd argument. There is no way that presidential immunity immunizes presidents for crimes committed in office. If the president murders his fiancée because she didn't get the dishes done on time or something, yeah, I think he can be arrested by the DC police and prosecuted for murder. His murdering his fiancée has nothing to do with his presidential offices. But what if the president, discovers an American terrorist in Washington, D.C., and he goes and plugs that guy? Well, arguably, he's doing his job, right? Maybe the Al Walaki case is right in that context, which is to say, as long as the president is acting within the outer perimeter of his job, then maybe you can commit crimes. I think arguably you can. I think that probably is the rule. The rule probably is the same for civil and criminal. So let's apply this rule to what we know about Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And this has been done, actually. In a civil case for wrongful death against Donald Trump, a DC judge did this analysis. And so I'm pretty confident that this is the right analysis. It held in that civil context that attempting to steal an election is not the job of the President of the United States. It is a purely personally motivated political action. So if it is a campaign action, as in trying to win an election, then it's not part of the job. Now, President Trump argues conversely, no, the president has the duty to uphold the integrity of the election. Well, as the DC Circuit judge pointed out, it's pretty absurd to say that you're upholding the election by intentionally trying to subvert it. I don't think that argument can possibly be right, but it is maybe something that needs a fact finder to determine whether the 2020 election was stolen. Ugh. I mean, we've had that a lot. There were 60 plus lawsuits filed before Donald Trump started doing anything illegal. I mean, he tried to overturn the election illegally. He just failed. The facts weren't there. They were so not there that there was never even a jury question for it, because it was mind-numbingly obvious to the federal judges, many of whom were appointed by Donald Trump, who actually looked at this. The thing is, it's not mind-numbingly obvious to a group of radical political actors who support Donald Trump. They don't care that the reality is that Donald Trump lost the election. They wish cast this into being, and maybe in so doing, maybe Donald Trump was wish casting his belief about the 2020 election. And maybe, even though he's delusionally, insanely wrong, maybe he didn't have the requisite state of mind to commit the crimes because he thought he was doing his job and he thought he was protected by presidential immunity. That's putting a lot of thoughts into Donald Trump's head, but maybe that's a question that has to get asked to a jury. And maybe it will. I mean, that may very well be the ruling that we get, is we get, no, presidential immunity is not absolute. It does not extend to crimes that you commit for your own personal gain. And we need a determination as to whether Donald Trump had the right state of mind to commit those crimes. That could be the ruling. We're going to get another ruling in a federal case on presidential immunity eventually, and it's going to come out of the Florida case, the document retention case. That one's not going to be as hard, because at least the things that Donald Trump did during the 2020 election monkey business are, if you really squint, colorably part of his job. There is no way that taking sensitive national defense information out of the White House, out of its secured location, and taking it home as souvenirs is part of the president's job. Presidential immunity will not apply there. For that reason, it will also not apply there because it doesn't apply to actions taken after you're president. There is no way that presidential immunity can be seen as a get out of jail for life card. That's not a thing. If Donald Trump, as a private citizen, runs a red light, the cop can give him a ticket. There is no suggestion in the precedent or the history that presidents are covered for life after they're out of office. That is an argument. that Trump's lawyers made in court today. They said that no, even after office, you have to impeach him before you can prosecute him. No, that's not right. The reason why you would need to impeach a president before you prosecuted them is if they were in office. Presidential immunity probably does protect them from being prosecuted until they're out of office. Once out of office, impeached, or their term runs out, oh, they're on the hook for crimes that they committed. That's how presidential immunity works, and we have some indice from none other than Ben Franklin, who was asked this question during the Constitutional Convention, and he reported that that's exactly what they mean. They mean that a president might have immunity during his presidency, but certainly doesn't after it's over. So this presidential immunity argument getting trotted out in the way that they did, it's not going to fly. Uh, the final thing that we have to recount was a particular question at the end during the hearing today, where one of the judges asked Donald Trump's lawyer, "Hey, could the president order SEAL Team 6 to go and assassinate his political rival?" This is, could Joe Biden order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate Donald Trump? Could he do that? Would it be legal? And the president's lawyer had to say yes. Yes. If you're going to go with absolute immunity for presidents forever, the answer is yes. Joe Biden could murder Donald Trump, according to Donald Trump's own lawyers. What makes you wonder what Joe's waiting for? All right, that was a dark thing. Anyway, it's just a thought. Let me know how wrong I am in the comments down below. Give me a like, hit that subscribe button, and just know that I really appreciate you. Thanks.